go directly to hear from the next speaker, Reece Williams, and then we'll pick up questions at the end, so store them up for both speakers. Reece Williams is a Manchester-based poet, peer mentor, workshop facilitator and theatre producer, and he works with Young Identity and Inner Voice collectives in Manchester. He's a real all-rounder, which is kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to invite him to speak to you today. He's a writer and performer in his own right, but he's also a really effective project manager, administrator, mentor and trainer, and I'm embarrassing him now. He's a trustee for Contact Theatre, and over the last year or so, I think he'll be telling you this himself, he's been working with the agency at Contact as a peer mentor, which is a really interesting project and one of the projects that we've been working with as a research project ourselves. Over to you, Reece.
Brilliant. John, you've really set the bar, and you've said that I'm going to be a better speaker than you, so thanks for... thanks. No, it's a real honour to be here. I really think that the theatre and the arts in general, it's a really sacred thing. I truly believe that what we do is life-changing and it's life-affirming. So to be in a room full of people who are either interested in making theatre and making art, or actually researching the impact of arts and how we can make that more prevalent in the society that we live in, it's really refreshing. A lot of what I'm going to say today is obviously it's a personal reflection, so I'd say it's more of a provocation than a keynote per se. But I think that there's some lessons that I've learned along the way that can be really potentially useful in the context of looking at the relative cost of ambition in the arts. So I'm going to start at the beginning and tell you a little bit about myself and I guess how I came to be interested in the arts and got involved in the arts. So when I was younger, 5 or 6, I loved reading. I've always had a passion for reading. Anything that I could get my hands on, I'd come home from school. Mum would give me a newspaper to read something just to practice. I'd read books, whatever I could get my hands on. And that was something that my mum really pushed me for. And the idea of education as well was something that my mum was always an advocate of. She had 3 children by the age of 22, kind of living in Moss Side, raising 3 children. And she managed to get a history degree from the University of Manchester. So that kind of message from a young age was that actually something great can be accomplished despite having economic challenges. My mum, when she was younger, when she was 8 or 9, she spent over a year homeless because of financial hardship. So again, real issues that I personally grew up around, and you know that really impacted the way that my mum brought us up. So that love of reading was a really key thing for me. It became the library became a place of safety for me. It became a place of escape and a place of adventure. And so I found myself reading things that progressed into actually writing my own stuff, writing stories, writing poems. And quite interestingly, earlier this year I was doing some spring cleaning and I found an old school report and a little certificate inside of it. And I think I probably would have been about 7 at the time when a teacher gave me a certificate for writing a poem. And I was really curious when I looked for the name of this particular teacher, and it's the same teacher who I really distinctly remember giving me a difficult time at school, which is quite ironic how it's come full circle. Anyway, as I progressed into high school, I took my love of reading and writing with me, and I started to experiment with writing lyrics. Really, really bad lyrics about how much money I had and how strong I was, and you know, the stuff that teenagers from my side and from inner city communities talk about. And I also started writing stories and little sketches, and a particular teacher at Trinity High School, I went to Trinity across the road, and Mr. Gilday was the first teacher that actually sat me down and said, Reece, you've actually got a really, really strong ability to tell stories, and you should take this further, you should do something with this. And obviously I dismissed him because I was either going to be a footballer or the next Tupac. So I didn't really give it any consideration. And besides, I'd never come across anybody who looked like me, who was actually in a career in the arts, whether that's as a writer or as a performer. There was nobody that I could relate to. There wasn't a role model that I could say, yeah, this person's done this amazing thing, this unusual thing, and actually earned something off their creativity. So it was something that I dismissed. And around this time, the school was doing a production. They put a call out on the notice boards for a production they were doing of a play which was all about the slave trade. And around that time, one of the things that I was reading in my own time was about Black history. And I felt it's really strange things, but quite spiritually compelled to be a part of this production. So, and plus a girl I fancied was also auditioning. So, you know, win-win situation. I auditioned, I got a role, and we actually put the play on at Contact Theatre. This would have been probably about 2004 as part of a festival, and that was the first time I'd actually stepped foot in a theatre. I'd never, ever in my life stepped foot in a theatre, and I was just almost turning 15 at that point. In the years that followed this first visit, I kind of took in as much theatre as I could. I visited Contact, I went to Zion, and took part in some of their workshops and stuff like that, and I guess just took things a little bit more seriously where my creativity was concerned. But again, I still never considered the arts as a viable career. It was always something that I did on the side. I never took drama at GCSE level. I never took drama at college. I did English language and literature because I enjoyed it. I was briefly toying with the idea of being a teacher. But, you know, we live in a society and a world where we're taught to be sensible and to be safe. So I left Savarian College and I went and studied law. You know, it's a safe subject. There's always going to be criminals. There's always going to be arguments, and there's always going to be people who are paid to put across a better argument. So I went over to Salford University and studied a degree in law, which I absolutely hated every minute of. Around that time when I first started studying law, I also joined Young Identity, which is a project I now work for as the administration manager. Young Identity is a creative writing and performance project for young people in Manchester, and it was set up in 2006 by two poets, Shirley May and Ali Gadema, at the Moss Side Powerhouse, and that's where the workshops took place. And probably about 4 months into my time at Young Identity, we actually moved the workshop over to Contact. John's smiling because he knows I'm going to tell the story. What basically happened was, because Young Identity was based at Powerhouse, it was around a time of a lot of youth conflict around postcodes, and there was a kind of a represent your ends kind of culture. So for those of us, of the young people who weren't living in Moss Side, to come over to the Powerhouse, they were threatened physically with violence, or, you know, underhand comments were made, and it just made it a really difficult thing for some young people to actually come and express themselves. Although poetry is probably the least gangster thing there is, but hey, this is often the things that young people experience, irrational fears and stuff like that. So yeah, I kind of got through the first year of university whilst combining work, working a part-time job, and also getting involved in Young Identity, performing up and down the country. We had the opportunity to go to America to perform and take part in an international competition, which was a great learning curve. The second year of university was a much different experience, because obviously the workload increases, and the situation that I found myself in is I had to actually work. I didn't qualify for a bursary from the university because my stepdad earned over the threshold, even though he was the only person in the house that was actually earning anything. So there's almost an assumption that because he's earning over that threshold that I'm financially stable, which wasn't the case. So I had to work part-time. Plus I wasn't going to give up the poetry stuff. It was my way of escaping. And I basically failed the second year of university. And so I spent the third year of university doing resits of the second year, all the while thinking, still not, I guess, quite conscious that actually there is a way out. There's nothing wrong with saying it's not for me, taking a step back from this thing and just trying something different. And it basically came to a head because the university actually scheduled my resits. So I failed second year, failed the resits of the third year. And then when they'd scheduled those resits that I was put forward for, they actually scheduled it on the day I was due to go to New York to perform at the New Eureka Poets Cafe. So anyone who knows poetry, it's pretty much the holy grail of live performance poetry. And I spent money to go, and I was like, forget it, I'm going to have to go. So I guess that decision kind of made itself. Following on from that, I guess there was a great period of reflection for me, considering I had probably £17,000 worth of debt for a degree that I didn't finish. Felt really that I didn't have a way out. I was quite depressed, I was quite isolated, and around that time, Shirley, who's the director of Young Identity, I'd been doing little bits and pieces for her in the office, just helping her out. She said, hey, come and volunteer for a while, maybe you can learn some new skills and it gets you out of the house. And I'm not sure if she knew at the time what I was going through or how I was feeling, but it really was a life-changing moment, because it was at that point when I actually saw firsthand that something can be done with this creativity, and actually this is a viable career. This is something that can potentially be a changing point for me at that point. And I quit my job at Tesco. I had a little part-time job at Tesco. Quit my job at Tesco when I joined Shirley. My parents, and again, this is where I bring in the theme of the relative cost of the arts. Although I, by no stretch of the imagination, come from a well-off family, I come from a very supportive family. And they said, you know what, if doing this volunteering position is actually going to make you happy, it's potentially an opportunity for you to discover a new industry and a new career, go for it. You're never going to go hungry here. You know, there's always going to be food in the cupboards. If you need money for a bus pass, we'll make that happen. You know, as long as it's something that you're going to be committed to, then let's make it happen. So I went and I did this about 6 months of volunteering with Shirley. We found a little pocket of funding to kind of pay it was about 220 quid a month I was getting, so less than I would get on the dole. But I guess I'm quite proud in that I refused to sign on or to take any benefits because of the stigma that's often associated with being young and being unemployed. And around that time, funny, three really key things happened while I was working with Shirley. Firstly, Nicole, who's Shirley's daughter, popped into the office one day and threw this little application form at me and was like, Reece, have you heard about LIPA? There's a university called LIPA, Liverpool Institute for Performing Arts. Check it out. They've got this really interesting course that you might want to check out. Read through it, I was like, great, I'm going to apply for this. They do a degree in music, theatre and entertainment management. It's very similar to what I was doing in the office anyway, so why not go back to university and get a qualification in it? Applied for it, thought nothing of it. The next thing that happened was Charles Lauder, who's the chair of the board of trustees at Contact Theatre, invited me to apply to become a trustee at Contact, and I went for that, and I was lucky enough to be selected as a young board member, so I kind of got the opportunity to see how theatre is run and how the arts work behind the scenes, and so I kind of went along to join Contact's board. And also Common Word, which is a writing development agency based in Manchester, they basically partnered with Young Identity to actually raise some funding from the big lottery to make the job that myself and Shirley were doing formal, because at that point everything had been done either on a project by project basis or totally voluntary. Shirley did it as an act of love and as an act of kindness. It was something she was really passionate about, and she gave her time to do it. And we were successful in the funding application, and I was appointed as the administrator for the project. A few weeks later, I got a letter from the university saying, "You're great, come and do this degree." I was like, and alongside it was a finance letter. I was like, "Shit, finance! I've not thought about how this is going to happen. It's clearly not a free degree." You know, we charge for education in this country. Called up the student finance people, and they were like, "Well, you're kind of on your own. You know, you failed the law degree. We've given you 3 years of funding. Do your thing." Again, sat down with my parents and like, it's obviously not going to happen. How are we going to make this work? And they basically said, "We've been saving some money to do the house up. The house needs doing up, but you know what? We're going to invest in you. We really want you to do this thing. We believe in you. It's going to cost us, but you know what? We're going to make this happen. If you can keep your part-time job with Young Identity going so that you've got some living costs covered and you can afford to get to and from university, those kind of things, then we'll make it happen between us." And on reflection, this is a privilege that not many people have, to be able to have parents that are willing to invest from their pockets and make that sacrifice in that way for me to go and do this degree. It's quite sobering. It really is sobering, and it really speaks lengths and volumes of the society that we live in. And I feel this way considering that I was lucky enough to be in the last year of the lower tuition fees at 3,000 odd, whereas now a degree costs, obviously, as we know, 9,000 plus a year. That's where the idea of relative cost comes in, because 9,000 a year over 3 years is £27,000 at least. Plus you've got living costs. And plus you've got the fact that the arts are a really, really difficult industry to crack, because it's so, again, intrinsically linked with public funding, with making the case. Again, there's a really poignant chapter in John Tusa's book, Engaged in the Arts, Writings on the Front Line, and he talks about the fact that every time a new budget is announced, arts are at the forefront of those cuts. And we also find ourselves in a position of constantly having to justify what the arts are able to do, both financially, the money that it raises, the social impact. Whereas many other industries, whether it's, you know, science-based industries and stuff like that, I guess it speaks for itself, and it really makes it difficult for those who come from an economically challenged or socially deprived background to go the educational route to obtain a career in the arts. What I also found was that the fact that I had to work part-time and had to make these sacrifices to be at university, it definitely impacted on my experience as well of studying, because whilst many of my peers, I think there was 3 of us who weren't actually living in, no, there was 2 of us who weren't living in Liverpool. Everybody else lived in Liverpool and, you know, got to know each other, they networked, they made the most of being in a new city. I missed out on that simply because a lecture would finish and I'd have to go back to Manchester to work. I would have to go back and try and get some sleep to get up early in the morning to go back. That really affected my experience of studying. Also, it affected me in the final year of my studies, because there's a module that we do in the final year of LIPA, which is called the Arts Manager Placement. And it's all about spending 3 months going out into the industry and doing a placement, so getting the experience of what it's like to work full-time for a company managing a project or an aspect of an organisation. And I was offered a position at Apples and Snakes, which is the leading poetry organisation in the country. Over in London, I was like, great. They could, at that point, offer some expenses, which would enable me to be there. And so I could take a sabbatical from my job with Young Entity and go and do this thing. Probably about 3 weeks before I was due to start, I got an email basically saying their funding for the project that I was due to be working on has been pulled. They'd still love to have me, but unfortunately they can't actually offer me any finance to be there, which, for me to give up my job and to move to a city that I have probably 2 relatives in, know very few people, and actually don't have anywhere to live or anything to survive, I think this wasn't going to happen. And so luckily enough, I managed to do a placement with a company called 53 Degrees North, which is based in Liverpool. But that got me thinking, because a lot of my peers, because of either their backgrounds, they came from totally different backgrounds to myself, were able to not pick on the basis of where can I do a placement and survive. They were able to pick on where would I get the best experience, where would I potentially get an opportunity to find a place in the arts. So they ended up in places like New York, working for Electric Lady, which is a well-known record label. Some of them ended up working at the National. Various different opportunities that weren't based on economic hardship. So I guess that's a reflection on potentially how coming from a poorer background can impact on your ability to either firstly pursue a career in the arts firstly, or secondly actually succeed or be on a level playing field at least with your peers. I'm going to quickly reflect on my professional life as well, my experience as a professional. So I've been working freelance officially. If anyone's working for the tax office. No, I've not earned any money other than the past 2 years. I've been working officially for about 2 years now as a freelance, and I've learned many lessons along the way about the relative cost of the arts. And the first thing I'll say is Shirley May has a phrase which she passes on to all the young people that she works with, which is know your worth and know your value. And it's a really, really challenging thing as a young person who's finding his feet in the industry to be offered work that I know doesn't reflect the value of what I'm contributing to a project or to an organisation, but to be able to afford to say no. It's a really, really difficult position. Often organisations, or at least in my early days as a freelance, for example, I'll give an example. I did about 40 hours of work for an organisation delivering film, writing workshops, and we produced a short film which went to film festivals across the country. I went to Germany, we won an award for the film. I did for about 40 hours of work, including preparation and delivery, and I was paid £200. Paid £200 by this company. I wasn't in a position to say no at the time, and I also knew that potentially it could lead to more lucrative work. Now, a year later, this very same company approached me and actually offered me less. They offered me less than what I'd been given the year before. And I sat and I thought, the sad thing, I guess, is that I actually thought about it. It wasn't straight away a no in my mind. I had to give myself some time to think about it. And the thought that came to my mind is, if I say yes at this moment in time, this is going to be my rate potentially forever, and this is actually not going to force this company to actually assess the way, and I guess the industry to fall in line with what the going rate is. And there's a principle in, I guess, project management, which I'm sure many of us are familiar with, which is full cost recovery. And full cost recovery is the idea that every single aspect of a project, every cost associated with delivering something is factored into a budget. And for the first time in my life, I actually said no to a piece of work. I said, actually, my preparation time alone to do a good job is going to cost X amount of money. My delivery is worth a lot more than that. For me to get to Oldham every week is going to cost me this amount of money. Obviously, I didn't get the job because they wouldn't have found somebody cheaper to do the work. But I guess that was a point at which I really began to value as an artist the work that I do. And it reinforced the fact that we don't go to a restaurant and eat a meal and say, I'm just going to pay you for the ingredients because you're cooking this meal for the love of it. Yeah? Or we don't go to a car dealership and drive away with a car and say, I'm just going to pay you for what the actual parts cost. No, we have to factor in the labour, we have to factor in the design, we have to factor in every single aspect that of the process that results in a car being made and a car being driven. And I was even more delighted when I found that this principle of full cost recovery actually comes from Marxism. So there's a kind of a theory within Marxism which talks about, I think it's all about labour. There we go, labour value theory, the labour value theory, which is the idea that everything involved in producing a product or a service should be factored in. And that a price or the cost of something, of a service or a product, is not about the pleasure or the use that a customer or a client gets from it, but actually the cost of producing it from beginning to end. And I think that's something that we don't appreciate in terms of in the industry and how the industry works until you're actually an artist and you're actually forced with these difficult questions. And unfortunately, it's going to remain the same. Whilst there's going to be someone who will do the work for cheaper, you know, it's firstly going to impact on the quality of work that we see out in the arts, and it's also going to impact on the value that we place on the arts. So I think for anybody out there who's making theatre, I'm probably preaching to the converted, because we're all ethical people, we're all good people. You guys at the back here, I'm really sorry that you've not been paid for your work today. It makes me feel uncomfortable now. Jokes aside, no, I think that we really need to get back to valuing the work that we do. Not so much as a profit-making exercise, but actually reflecting that being an artist or being a theatre maker does not make us exempt from paying bills. It does not make us exempt from wanting to own our homes and from actually needing to survive. So it's quite, I guess it's been quite negative up to this point, what I've been talking about, I guess the challenges of coming from an economically challenged background or from being an artist existing in the industry. But there are a few examples of how some initiatives are actually overcoming these kind of barriers, and one of those is the agency. The agency is a project which I'm a peer mentor on, and it's originally set up in Brazil about 7-8 years ago by an amazing guy called Marcus Faustini, who's a theatre practitioner. And it's all about working with young people in the most difficult communities to empower young people to make and develop projects which benefit their community. So we deliver the agency in Moston and Harper Hay in Manchester, and we also deliver it in Battersea in London. And one thing that really struck me when I was doing the training and I was sitting down and talking about how the project works was that we actually pay our participants to be there. They get 30 quid a week expenses to actually be there, because for a young person to be offered an opportunity to become a change maker, to become potentially an entrepreneur, to be given this opportunity to spend 8 hours a week working on a project is great, but if you can't afford to be there, and for you to be there means that you're turning down work, then it's not actually practical. So we actually pay our participants to be there, and I think that's a model that we need to adopt more prevalently within the industry, whether that's theatre, whether that's the arts. We need to find ways to actually pay young people for their participations and to incentivise that, even if it's just expenses, if it's covering their bus pass for a week, if it's actually making sure that when they finish a workshop, they're not worrying about how they're actually going to get home, or they're not having to do a double shift the next day to make up on the money that they've missed out on. And the next thing and I think this is a really key principle, is this idea of mentoring. And I've really benefited from having mentors and having people who are really committed to seeing me progress in the way that I can progress as a professional, but are also finding ways to include me in their budgets. So when I was working with Shirley, we found little pots of funding, and often it was simply about adding a line to a budget, or being creative with the budgeting. You know what I mean? If there's a travel budget and you're not using the travel budget, then push that over to a young person. And also, we need to, again, I really see the value in volunteering and apprenticeships, but we need to find a way for those apprenticeships to firstly be for a defined period of time, because there are some people I know who started off at the same stage as me and are either earning a lot less than me per hour if you break it down, or I guess constantly find themselves being offered opportunities. So hey, come and be an assistant director on this production, come and do this workshop as a professional, but we're not going to pay you because this is a chance for you to boost your CV. All those things are important in the beginning because it's how we learn. You know, making mistakes at that point is not going to impact on your professional integrity. It's not going to impact on your reputation. But as you progress, I'm 26 years old now, and I guess in the next 2 years, I'd like to be able to consider having a mortgage or being able to afford a girlfriend.
Reece, you've got a minute. Okay.
Yeah. So I guess these are the challenges that we face, and whilst it's great to be offered opportunities to be employed or something to become volunteers and to contribute to an organisation, we need money. We need to be paid. We can't live for free. And then from then, we need to empower young people. The last thing I'd say is we need to invest in young people, not as a point of they're the future of the arts, but actually they're the future of society, because often, and this is the great thing about and I'll finish on this point, about the agency, is that it's not an arts project per se. It uses arts methodology to inspire young people to create projects which may or may not, or are often not related to the arts. So projects that we've had have been, for example, a baking project which was called Crumbs, which responded to food poverty in Moston, and it was a series of workshops for young people to learn how to bake, to be given the ingredients to physically afford to learn to bake and make scrapbooks with their families. I think the only project which was, I guess, directly arts related was the Artist Avenue, which is a project I worked on with a young man called Victor, and it's basically about getting visual art produced by young people in Moston up in public places in the community. I've kind of run out of time. I'm sure during the break, if you've got any questions, you can ask. Like I said, it is a provocation. You can come back and challenge me on anything that I've raised, and I'll politely tell you why I'm right. No, thank you very much for listening, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the day.